Hello and welcome back to the She is Courageous podcast with me, Shelley Bosworth. How are we all doing? Now, I've been umming and ahhing about recording this podcast and decided to just dive in. When you listen to this, I'm not sure when this will come out actually, so it'll be in about 2 weeks' time, I think. But in short, we have just been away for a weekend in Armenia. Now, I'll be honest with you, I knew nothing about Armenia. We stayed for a few days in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. We went out for a day travelling, and I knew next to nothing about this country before we decided to go there. I didn't know a huge amount once we got there, if I'm totally honest with you. I could barely have pointed it out on a map, and I certainly didn't know the story. Now, Armenia is like three and a bit hours from Dubai. So it was one of those kind of Googling, where can we go that's less than 4 hours flight for 3 or 4 days? No time difference. It was basically like the European city breaks that we used to do when we lived in the UK. Now, clearly we've never been there before, and it sounded a bit different, right? But since we've been there and came back, I just keep thinking about what I learned while over there. And I felt like I needed to record this episode while it was fresh, to be honest, because essentially I learned a lot about Armenia and its history, and it got me thinking about stories, our stories, and how relevant these learnings were to me and how relevant they are to us in business, in life, when it comes to mindset. Now, before I go flying into it all, I'm going to share with you just a little bit about what I learned about Armenia this weekend. I'm not going to give you a history lesson. Maybe you know things, okay? Because I've spoken to people since and they're like, oh yeah, didn't this happen there? And then there's others that say, where's that then? It's not going to be a history lesson, just a tiny little bit of insight, because it really has got me thinking about our stories. So I hope this whole episode makes sense. I'm sure it will to some. Some of you might be like, what was that? Maybe you won't. Who knows? But it's really got me thinking about our stories. So we spent 4 days in Yerevan in Armenia. Do go check it out on a map if you are interested. If you live here in Dubai, it's great for a little city trip. If you live a bit further away, maybe fit it into a trip somewhere, because I would recommend it. Now, we love to explore. We love to just wander the streets. We love to soak up the culture of a place, the atmosphere. Mr. B likes to try out all the food, like to get the real feeling of a place. We're not really people that go to lots of museums, albeit if there is a museum that tells you the story of a country, I will drag Mr. B to that history museum, and some have been better than others. But we didn't go to the museum because actually what we did was we booked to go out for a day out of the city. We've got a private guide, a wonderful lady whose English was incredible. We are so fortunate with English, aren't we? And she not only gave us a great experience, but she really helped us understand the story of Armenia. Now, as I said, I'm not going to give you a history lesson, but here's the things I did not know before we decided to go there. I did not know that Armenia went through a genocide where more than 1 million people were killed in quite a short space of time. Now, I know we all know what a genocide is. It's absolutely awful. And I did not know that was part of Armenia's story. And actually, I did not know, because I didn't do enough research in advance, that while we were there, it was Remembrance Day of the genocide. Turned out to have its benefits and its not so benefits, because a lot of stuff was closed. But hey, these things happen, right? But anyway, we learned about the Armenian genocide. Because, of course, we don't learn that in school in the UK. What we hear about, what we learn about is World War I, World War II, and the UK's part in that, England's part in that. Anyway, so I didn't know there was an Armenian genocide. Please don't judge me for that. Then, what she told us to us about genocide. So our guide, going back generations, she had the stories passed down to her. Her grandparents had been able to share insight into what coming out of the genocide had been like, what they'd learned about the genocide. Then Armenia was pulled into the Soviet Union, which I probably did know, to be fair. I probably did know at one point it was part of the Soviet Union. But I think that the reality is we don't truly understand what that means, or I didn't truly understand what that means. We know what we see, we know the snippets we learn over time. But essentially, what that meant for Armenia was decades of control, restrictions, losing part of their culture. Anyway, then they came out of Soviet times. They talk a lot about Soviet times. Anyway, they came out of Soviet times and they had a devastating earthquake just as they were starting to put their country back together. There have been multiple wars. They have lost multiple parts of their country to surrounding countries. And it was just incredible to listen to and to understand. She was describing, we lost this part to Azerbaijan and we lost this to Turkey and we lost this. And there's still war raging around them now, affecting them today. And look, I'm not about to get all political, okay? My point really is that despite all of that, despite knowing none of this and learning this, and this was just like the last 100 years, God, honestly, as I'm telling you this, the story is just incredible. Anyway, despite all of that, what really shone through for us was a genuine pride in their country, not just from our guide, from everyone we spoke to, from the locals, a real pride in telling of their story, a real resilience as a nation in terms of what they've gone through, what they've experienced and how they continue to pick themselves back up and go again. And they speak with such pride and joy about their country now. They are proud of who they are, where they've come from, and more importantly, where they are going. Now, none of that's clearly been easy for them, but actually that pride and that resilience is what I came to love about Yerevan. It's not the prettiest place I've ever been. It's not got the most to see that I've ever been. It's got a really nice vibe about it. You can absolutely see where they are going and what the hopes and aspirations are. They're really working on becoming somewhere that now represents who they are, not who they were. What the country is becoming rather than what the country was. And whilst the story is still really important, they're not holding on to it with a vice-like grip. They are saying, look, this is part of where we came from. This is our origin story, if you like, but this is where we're going. Anyway, it really got me thinking about our own stories, because we are told in business all the time to talk about our origin story, tell your story, let people know you. We're told people buy from people. And so this weekend that we were in Armenia and understanding and learning the story that I didn't know really got me thinking about our story, about my story, about how it's not just about what we survive, it's not just about what happens to us, it's about who we become because of it. It's more importantly about who we are now and everything that has got us to this point, and I think we forget that. Now, interestingly, I have been rereading a book called The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan, and one of the key principles of that is to measure backwards. So the whole point of that is, actually, if you continue to measure yourself against where you're trying to get to, all you're doing is measuring a gap because you're not there yet. But actually, if you measure yourself against where you've come from, you are measuring the gain, because you are measuring how far you have moved forward, how much you have gained, where you are now versus where you were. And that really resonates with me alongside learning the story of Armenia, because they're not about holding on to that. They're saying, look, this is where we've come from. Look, we see all of that as gain and it makes us who we are and this is where we're going. And I just think we forget this. I think that we forget how important our stories are. I think that what happens is so often we forget how far we've come. I think we get stuck in thinking that our stories are the tough bits. I think if you think about some of the big names, okay, and I'm only going to talk about big names in my industry, but we often hear big name people in our industry will tell you their story of drama and resilience. And Tony Robbins has just jumped to mind, and I'm going to get this wrong. Didn't he sleep in his car or something? Things were so bad. Mel Robbins, I do know her story. Mel Robbins nearly lost everything. She talks about how her and her husband nearly lost everything in the restaurant business that her husband set up and almost at bankruptcy. You hear these stories all the time. This person went through all of this. And don't get me wrong, some of those stories are absolutely incredible. They're very inspiring to hear how those people have come through trauma, heartbreak, really devastating stories and come out the other side and look at what they've made of themselves. They are very inspiring stories. But I think it can also have us starting to think, maybe this is just me, but I think it can have us starting to think that if we don't have drama, great big stories of resilience and survival, then we don't have a story. And I don't think that's true. And whilst Armenia's story is actually a huge story of resilience, I didn't know that, and I still chose to go there. So I think what I'm trying to get across is that this weekend really got me thinking about what our stories are and what they stand for. And they're not just what we've been through, but actually about what we choose to do with them afterwards. Because no one's story is harder or worse than anyone else's. It's your story. It doesn't matter who's had more of anything. Someone said to me recently that actually I think your origin story is out of date. And I thought it was a really interesting comment. And at the time I didn't take it very well. But now I get it. Because actually my origin story, if you like, the story that I often tell of leaving the corporate world, about the loss of my husband's parents and the health scare, what we experienced in a really short period of time, that is all still absolutely true. That is still my story. It's a massive part of who I am, why I am where I am now, why I am the person I am now. Fundamentally, it's why I get to sit here right now talking to you in this way. Because if those things had not occurred, I don't think for a second I'd be doing this. I don't believe that fate would have had a hand and I would have become a coach one day anyway. So anyone that doesn't agree with that's cool, but that's not what today is about. But what I know is that story is still part of me, a really important part of my journey. But here's what I also know. I'm not actually that person anymore. I'm not that woman. Like, that story is 10 years ago. That part of my story started 10 years ago this year, the year that my husband and I got married. And I've written so many new chapters since then. I'm daring to dream things that I never dared to dream back then. God, this is the She is Courageous podcast. I'm more courageous than I was back then in a very different way. Sometimes I'm less courageous, but that's a whole other story. But I think what I'm trying to say is this weekend and hearing the story, the history of Armenia and the tough stuff in that, but the realization that they aren't holding on to that in such a way it's holding them back, that actually they're using that story to propel them forward. They're using it with pride, they're sharing it with pride, but they're building upon that. And they're now telling you about the current story. This is who we are now, this is where we're going. And I guess my question to you today is, are you holding on to an old story? Because it's familiar. Because when I was challenged recently that it was time to update my origin story, whilst my initial reaction was like, no, that's my origin story. It's my original origin story. But it's not my story now. In the last 3 years, I've moved to a new country. I've started a new life. I'm in a really different phase of my business. I'm in a different phase of my life. So this isn't my original origin story. It's my current story. It's my new story, but it's my current story. It's my story. And I guess my point is, I've come away thinking about, it's time to own who I am now. The business I'm building now, the life I'm living now, because it's very different to where I thought I would be 5, 6, 7 years ago. And maybe it's time for you to do the same. Maybe it's time to look at your story, because your stories are one of the most powerful tools you have. Not just for yourselves and your confidence, but for your growth, for your business, for the way that you connect with people, for the way that you inspire trust in people. We hear it all the time, don't we? Know, like, trust. People need to know you, they need to like you, they need to trust you. We hear people buy people, not products. People don't just buy what you do. They buy why you do it. They buy who you are. And your story is how they get to know you. It's how they learn about you. It's how they learn to feel about you. It's how they learn to trust you. And not everybody will resonate with your story, by the way, and that's okay. I don't think owning your story is easy, because it does mean owning the messy bits. It means owning the mistakes. It means owning the doubts, the pivots, the seasons that didn't bring the things that didn't go according to plan. But it also means owning the good stuff, being proud of the wins and the achievements. And all of that can feel very vulnerable. All of that can feel very exposing. But I think we've got a bit of a narrative around us, maybe I have, for a really long time, that if we share a really vulnerable side of us, then everybody will resonate. You can share both sides. You can share that origin story. You can share the vulnerable piece. You can share where you've come from, but share who you are now. Share where you're going and own it with pride. I think we say to ourselves, no one cares about my story. Not true. People do care about your story. It turns out people care about my story. And when we tell ourselves those lies, because that's what they are, by the way, we tell ourselves lies and then we end up hiding and we end up playing smaller than we are. And I don't want that for any of you. I want you to own your story, all of it. The wins, the losses, the lessons, all of it. I want you to show up in a way that literally brings people to you, your people, and it will because it's your story. Whether that's personally or in business, by the way. People will connect with you and your business if they get to know you. That's when things feel really aligned, not forced. And I don't usually use words like that. When you're not trying to be someone, but you are just being you, owning every part of who you're becoming, everything that's got you to where you are, everything that's going to take you where you're going. That's what Armenia got me thinking about this weekend. That's what I want you to think about. Are you owning your current story? Are you potentially holding on to your old story and not truly embracing your current story and certainly not allowing yourself to step into your new story? It's just a question. Now, you might be thinking, this is all really great and now I want to visit Armenia, Shelley. I'm not on commission with Armenia's tourist board. It's a long way to go for some people. I also appreciate that. But you might be like, okay, but what do I do with this? How do I own my story without feeling awkward or, dare I say it, maybe a bit fake? I just want to share with you a few things that since we got back and since this has been on my mind, I've been doing. So the first thing I've done is I got my journal back out. I don't really call it a journal, as you'll all know, but I got my book back out and I wrote down my story again. I just had a bit of a scribble, right? I haven't written essays, but I went back to my origin story, as I call it, the original origin story, but I kept writing. Because I don't think I've done that for a while. So like my origin story is 25 years in corporate, this happened, that happened, made this decision, left, pandemic. A lot of stuff went off in the pandemic, my husband was made redundant. And then I go, but here I am now, 5 years later. There's 5 years to talk about there. So I wrote about actually the rest of it. I kept writing. I've not written tons and tons, but it's a reminder that my story has evolved. So I want you to do the same. I want you to write down your story. I want you to write down right up to current day, unfiltered, not for anybody else, just for you. Not the version you even think you should tell everybody else, but the real story of you and how you have got to where you are right now, right today. Go and write it down. Go remind yourself. It's really interesting because I was like, oh my God, I've been like jumping over a piece. The second thing I did was by rewriting that story, by reminding myself of my actual story, my current story, how my story has evolved, I realised there's even more to be proud of. And actually, I decided to take a moment, and I want you to do this too, and really acknowledge 2 or 3 things that I'm really proud of in the latter parts of my story. Because I talk a lot about how proud I am of leaving corporate, but there's so much more since then. So I want you to go back and write your story right up to current day, but then really pay attention to think about where you've got some really proud moments in there. Pull out 2 or 3 things that you are really proud of. Go write down that story, pull out a few things, and then maybe just have a think about almost like what's the golden thread? What connects it all? Because that's what your story says about you. The reason I bang on about courage is because I fundamentally believe, that courage is the key. But also because actually, gosh, I'm having to tap into courage to even say this, because courage is a theme that has run through my story. Now, I didn't realise that for a long time, which is why I didn't talk about courage the minute I came out of the starting blocks of running my business. People always thought I was really confident, but I wasn't that confident. And that's the point of courage. And I think that's the point of what I've done. Actually, I've done quite a few things courageously. Not everything, all right? I still get scared. I still have fear. But courage is my thing, and I tap into courage much more than I try and tap into confidence. I hope I act with courage. I believe it's through courage I've got to where I am right now. All these years later, when I never really thought this is what I'd be doing. So write down your story all the way to current day. Pull some stuff you're proud of, and then maybe just see if there's a golden thread. Is there something that connects it all? Now, it might not leap out of the page, and don't panic if it doesn't. But just start sharing from the place of the current story. Start sharing from a place of who you are now, not from a script, not from a highlight reel. Just share as a person, as a woman who's still writing her story, because you are. We all are. I think overriding this message today is your story isn't done. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you're in the middle bit. I know for damn sure I am far from the end of my story, but I've been holding on to the beginning part. It's all I've been telling people about. The middle is where I am right now, and I invite you to embrace the middle of your story. I know you know this, okay? You don't need a perfect story. There is no perfect story. You don't need huge amounts of drama to show everyone how resilient you are. You don't need all the wins to show how brilliant you are. You just need your story. Just your true story of you. Because I believe the world is craving real right now more than ever. But I know for damn sure people will resonate. People will embrace it. People will love you and trust you for that. So I hadn't planned to record an episode about my visit to Armenia. But as I have, here's what I want to leave you with. If you were to tell your story right now, today, not the story from 5 years ago, not the one from where you started, but your story of right now, who you are, how you got here, where you're going. What would that sound like? Who are you now? Where do you dream of getting to next? Where have you tapped into courage and built something you never thought was possible? Where are you not giving yourself credit for your story? I often talk, when I talk about mindset, I do a particular session on building a courageous mindset. And in that I talk about past, present and future. And I often say the past doesn't exist anymore. It only exists in your mind, in your memories. That is true, by the way. The past does not exist. It only exists as a memory in your mind. That's a bit of my light bulb. The past that I've been using as my origin story, that doesn't actually exist anymore. It's a memory. It was real at that point, but it's no longer real. It was then real. It's not today. So is your story stuck in the past? Because your story is actually ever moving, ever evolving. It's ever growing, just like mine is. So if you have got a story of struggle and survival, absolute kudos to you, by the way, because it is how you've become who you are. But you are not just a woman who struggled and survived. You are a woman who is becoming whoever you want to become, and the world deserves to know her too. So this is going to sound really cheesy, but just let's all remember who we are becoming, who we are now, not just who we were. Your story is not done. Our stories are not done. Be proud of every part of it so far. But I invite you to go and tell the rest of your story. Now, if this episode has got you really thinking, I would love to hear about it. Now, obviously, I'd love to hear about it. I would love to hear whether this has resonated for you, whether it's got you thinking about your story, and actually whether you are ready to share your current story, the story of who you are now and where you are going. And if you are ready to share it with me, share with me what this has got you thinking. Share with me your story. Head over to Instagram, send me a DM. I am always open to hearing your story. But if you want to tell more people, do it. And then give me a tag on the socials at she_is_courageous_collective. Bit of a mouthful, that one. I'll pop it in the show notes. But share your story with us. Share your story with the world, because we would love to celebrate you and your story with you. And I'm going to say it again. Your story is not finished. You are just getting started on the next chapter. Every single day we're writing more. And I don't know about you, but I'm planning on some really great chapters still to come.